Alrighty, so I have to apologize. I completely forgot to start recording this when I disassembled it. But we're going to make a little video here on how to assemble a 3 drop target assembly for a Bally Midway Special Force. I've already gone through and I've cleaned all these parts off. Every little thing. The coil sleeves, every piece of metal, the drop targets themselves. So we're going to go ahead and reassemble it. Not to worry, I'm going to make a separate video with the other drop target assembly I have to do. It's only a single drop target, but it's basically the same principle. Alright? So, we're going to first start off with our coil bank in here. Now, these 3 coils here, they actually work the rockets. So whenever you hit the rocket button to shoot down a drop target, these little coils will shoot one of these plungers up and knocks the drop target down. So we're going to get this assembly built, and then we'll go on to the next step, okay? Basically, as you can see, I still have the jumper wires attached for the grounds. And I just decided to do it that way because it was a lot easier. I didn't have to disconnect those in order to clean the coils. The coil sleeves, I mean. Because all the coils were perfectly fine. I don't have to worry about replacing them. So basically what we do is we're going to take one of these mounting plates that goes on the bottom of the coil. And it's going to get placed on like so. And we'll do that with all 3 of them. Just like that. Now, we'll take our little plunger. As you notice, it's got a plastic nylon kind of tip on it. That's so that when it shoots upward and hits the drop target to drop it down, it doesn't damage the drop target like a metal piece would do. So you got your plunger, you got your spring. Slide your spring on, and the plunger is going to go right into there. Alright? And we'll do that with the other 2 here real fast. And then we'll start lining them up in place. By the way, all 3 of these coils are the same, so it really doesn't matter where they go. I'm just putting them back in the way I took them out, just because I didn't take that jumper wire off. So, it works just fine. Basically, the best way to put them in is you depress the plunger, get that tip into there, and it's in place. And we do the same with the other 2. Just like so. Okay. Now from here we're going to take our Phillips screws. We're going to line up those bottom plates and get them screwed in. That coil sleeve on this one wasn't pushed all the way through the coil. That's why I couldn't get it lined up right away. I apologize for the terrible view. Okay, just get these started into place. Once you get all 6 screws started, because there's 2 for each, then you can go ahead and tighten them down. Okay, here's the last one. Now it's the last one, we can go ahead and just go ahead and crank them all down. Nice and tight. Don't over tighten them. The metal that the threads are made into here is really thin, so I wouldn't worry about over cranking it. Just get it nice and snug where things aren't going to move around too much. just like so. Okay. Make sure these things are lined up nice and good. Okay, they're working just fine. Nice and smooth. There's nothing sticking. So basically, whenever you hit the button that's right below the flipper on the left-hand side, you have your 3 drop target banks with tanks, and that missile will drop a target every time you hit that shoot button. Which basically, the way the game makes that happen is it'll activate this coil and bam, knock your drop target down. You hit it again, bam, there's your drop target 2, and then your third one right there. And that's how it drops it without breaking the drop targets. Okay, now that we have this assembly put back together, we're going to go ahead and go on to the next part of the assembly. So we'll be right back. Alright, so we're on to the next part here, and this one's kind of a 2-piece thing that you have to do. You need to put the reset relay back in. Oops, the sleeve came out. No big deal. The thing slides right out. I already cleaned it. Here's the pressure washer. That right there. You got to put the reset relay arm back in, and then we got to get the switch bank put back in. As you can tell, I numbered them. That's just because I kept the ground wires attached and the diodes attached. The switches are fine. They're perfectly clean. I've already gone through and cleaned all the contacts and everything. This will just make it easier for me to rewire it when I put it back in the pinball, because when I took the wires off, I literally wired them 1, 2, 3. And of course the ground here, I put 1 ground, so I know it goes right to that ground spot. It's just the cheapest, easiest way to do it. Might as well do that, right? But anyway, we need to get the reset coil put back in place. And of course I knocked the sleeve back out again. So here's the sleeve. It's not perfect, but I've cleaned it up really well, and it should work just fine, honestly. So, what we need to do is get this assembled first. So, we'll turn that so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. It's not going to be that great, but it's better than nothing. There are 2 plates that hold this in spot. We have the bottom plate for it, which has got a stopper on it, and that's for the plunger on the reset bar. And then we have the top plate. That mounts it in place as well. Now, I want you to note that the bottom plate, we're going to put it in place just as a temporary thing, but there is no threads in this plate for the bottom stopper plate. Those threads are actually in the upper piece that the drop targets go through. So, they're only going to be put in place just to hold this coil in place temporarily. We'll remove them when we put that guide back in place. So, what we need to do is get this assembled like so, okay? If you look at this, you have this L-shaped part of the bracket, and then you got these little forks coming off here. The terminal points for this coil are going to face up towards these little forks. Alright, so we'll go ahead and get this put back into place. Remember, when you do this, don't tighten the screw all the way down, just most of the way down. Otherwise, you're going to cause yourself a problem and not be able to line the other screw up. Now we have the plate in place. We'll go ahead and crank it down nice and tight. Okay, now, like I said before, these bottom ones, they're all temporary. We're going to put them in just so that it holds it in place while we do what we have to do next. That's if I can get the dang thing to actually stay in the screwdriver. Sometimes you gotta manipulate stuff and move it around until you get it in the right spot for yourself. Okay, I'll be right back and I'll get these bottom screws in. They're being a pain in the butt for me, so we'll do that in a sec. Alright, like I said, I went ahead and got these screws put in place temporarily because, again, there's no threading in this plate. The threading is on the drop target guide plate. So they're just in there just to hold this coil in place for me to do what I have to do next, alright? So there it is. It's in place now. So the next step is to get this whole reset arm put in place. And what this does is when the coil activates, it pushes this arm up and causes the targets to reset, alright? You can put this in at the same time when you do this coil, if it makes it easier. I prefer to get the coil lined up and then just monkey around with getting this in place. Sometimes it takes a few attempts, but to me, that's completely worth it. Look at that. It didn't even take me more than a second. So the plate's going to sit like this, alright? You see this little plastic piece right here? They're on both sides of this plate, and there's one on this plate and one on this plate. Those are bushings for the rod that's going to go through here. And I'll show you that rod in a little bit. But just note that these bushings are opposite to the side of these little 4 forks. Alright? That's a key thing to remember. So we have it in place, and essentially when the drop targets are down, the coil will activate, which pushes this rod arm up and pushes the drop targets up back into place again. Alright? And I'll show you how it resets, because you can tell there's no spring right here like some coils. But there is a spring on the other side, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So, now that we have this in place, I'm going to get us set up so we can get these switches put back in place. Once the switches are in place, we're going to get the drop target set up. Alright, so here we go. Alright, so now it's time to put this switch plate back in place. These switches are for each of the drop targets, so the game knows when a drop target, well, essentially is dropped. So, we need to get this put back in the position that it needs to be. The 1, 2, and 3 is helping me personally, okay? Yours might be different. Not saying they're lined up differently and wired differently. They're going to be wired the same. What I mean by that is how you personally remember how to put it back together. And this is just one of the various ways that I do it. I also take a lot of pictures as well, too. But labeling these just kind of gives me a little extra help. Now, the way to know to put this plate in is by the screw holes. If you notice, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 holes, and then 1 and 2. There's also 4. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the switches need to be pointing towards these 4 forks here. Okay? What I mean by that is the contacts here are pointing towards these 2 points right here. The part of the switch that's not like where you wire in the actual wires themselves, the physical contacts, and of course like the points in here that are hit by the target when it drops down, needs to be up towards these 4 forks here. Okay? Another reason why taking pictures is really important. So we gotta slide this in, and we need to adjust these 2 plates, because technically there's only 1 screw holding each plate together, and they can move left and right and stuff like that. So we need to line all that stuff up. So we'll get this aligned up first down here. And again, don't tighten the screw all the way down. You just want to have it holding a few threads at the bare minimum. Alright guys, so I made a little bit of boo-boo-boo here, and I'm going to show you what I did wrong. First, I was thinking this plate needs to go underneath here, just like so. Here's where my problem came in. I didn't take pictures of this assembly like this before I took it apart. And that's where I made my biggest mistake, because when I went to look at them, I was like, uh-oh, how do I do this then? It actually goes on top. So these plates, or these two screw plates here, are going to go on top of these two tabs, while these four go below these four tabs. Like so. Okay? So, we're going to get these lined up now, the way it's supposed to be. And again, you're not going to tighten them all the way down. You want to make sure that you have a little bit of looseness so you can make any kind of adjustment you need to make. Just like so. See, they're still nice and loose. You don't have to worry. They can move around. Now, we need to line up two screws on the outside here. Okay? So, we'll get our screws set up. You may have to push these tabs in a little bit to get them to line up, but that's the most you really have to do for that spot here. Again, don't tighten them all the way down. Get that set in place. Okay, now that we have our stuff set in place where it needs to be, we can go ahead and tighten the whole thing down. I know, I made that weird mistake from not taking photos, so just remember, it's always important to take pictures of what you're doing. So, if you do make a boo-boo or you forget, because there's a lot to a pinball machine, you can at least look at the pictures and go, oh, okay, that's where I was wrong, and then correct it from there. Don't be embarrassed to take pictures. It's an important step. Alright, now we have that in place. The next thing we need to do is put this in place. Now this is like a stopper for the drop targets. Basically, it's the same kind of idea as a stopper for a coil, except for this plate's going to go where the drop targets fall down. And you'll notice I've got little marks on there, and that's from where the screws were located previously. That just makes it a little bit easier for me to make sure that's going into the correct spot. And these require 2 Phillips screws. This I took pictures of. So essentially get those screws set up, and you can either follow the marks that you make, or just essentially go off the fact that this needs to be kind of level with this plate here. Alright, so you need to make it flush. It can't be down below like you see it is right now. It can't be up higher than it. It needs to be generally flush with this plate. So the closer you make it to being flush, the more accurate and better everything will be. Those marks I made were more like a generalized kind of spot. Like, okay, you should generally be here. But I can look at it and also feel it and determine if I need to go up or down. Another good reason why snugging things and not tightening things is good, because when you snug them, you can make adjustments at least, like little finite adjustments like this. Okay, so we're back with our marks. Everything looks good. We'll go ahead and tighten this bad boy down. Make sure our marks on the other side are lining up. Again, tighten it down. And there we go. So we have this all adjusted. switches are in place, coil's in place, reset arm is in place. Now, we need to set up our drop targets and our coil bank. Oh, and of course we have to do the drop target guide too. So let's go ahead and get this taken care of, and we'll go on to the next stop. Alright, so we'll see you in just a sec, guys. Alright, so now we're on to the next part, which is putting on our drop targets, the drop target guide pin, which is essentially the pin that goes through the reset coil that helps reset all of the drop targets at once. And of course we're going to put the springs in too, but we'll do that once we get things mounted down. So, key thing to note, here are our drop target assemblies. And yes, the artwork is trash. I'm waiting for new decals. I'm not getting new drop targets because the targets are fine. We can put little decals over these, and I'll show you in another video on how to do that while it's installed in the playfield. But the first thing to do is we need to generally set these drop targets in place with these little plates and guides. Alright? Now the drop target doesn't go into this little slot here. Alright? It goes on the outside of this plate. The artwork for the target is going to go opposite to the coil. So the coil is right here. That means the artwork is going to go like this. Alright? So we'll generally put them in place. This little arm is going to go into this slot right here. So it's right there. And this little part of the arm is going to go into this front slot right there. Alright, so we have it in general place. The target sits on the outside of this metal plate right here. We'll do the same with the rest of them. That's fine that it fell down. It's not a big deal. We just need to put them in general place, like I said. Okay. So to have them in place for the most part. Now, to kind of keep them in place, we're going to go ahead and put this bar through. And there are holes right here. This one and this one. This is the hole that that pin is going to go through. And each one has its very own hole. And you're going to go through each one of them and through those bushings that I showed you earlier. So, this pin, we'll go ahead and actually we need to fix this real quick here because the plunger popped out of the old coil. There we go. There we are. So, now we'll go ahead and put this pin in. We'll follow the bushings. Again, doesn't matter if those drop targets fall, because the big picture is it's going to go through every single one regardless. So you can technically do this one at a time if you wanted to. So, goes through that one, then it'll go through this one once we get it all lined up in the slot. Alright, same with the next one. Then we're going to go through that bushing and this outer bushing right here. Okay, so now we've got this all the way through. Don't worry about these drop targets. We have to put an E-clip right on here. Alright? Now, most people have a fancy little tool to do this. I don't. I use a flat blade screwdriver to pop them off carefully. You want to take your time because if you bend them, you can't reuse them. And then I use a pair of slip pliers on the largest setting to help snap them in place. It's not the ideal way to do it, but if you're balling on a budget, this is one of the best ways to do it. So you just kind of generally line it up. Then you take your pliers and you very carefully snap them into place. You'll find a groove in this pin here, and if you put the edge of these pliers right on the edge of that groove, like on the outside of it, so this can still slip past the pliers, these things will snap right on. Alright, and it's going to work just fine. I mean, look at that. No problems whatsoever. There we go. So, now that we got that done, drop targets in place. Same with the reset bar. Now, we need to get the springs put back on for each drop target. Not only is that going to keep these things straight up, or generally straight up, so they don't just flop down like that, but that's going to create the tension needed, a downward tension, so when you hit a drop target, it actually drops down. So, these are the springs. You just need to snap one end of the spring onto this little loop right here of the drop target. And then, let's see if I can't get you a little bit closer. Alright. That hole there, the farthest hole away from the drop target, is where the other end of the spring is going to go. So, let's go ahead and we'll snap that on and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so that's set up right there. I dropped the other two down to make it easier for us all. But as you can see, one end is directly attached to the drop target, the other is to the outer hole to the drop target. And what that causes is when you go and hit, when the drop target's set up, and you go and release it, that spring is going to force it down. Alright? So if you have problems where the drop target's not coming down very fast or at all, one of your issues could be this spring. A temporary fix is to kind of stretch the spring out and cut some links off so it has a little more tension behind it, but that's a temporary fix. You don't want to do that as a permanent fix or a pinball you're going to sell. Just order a new spring. That's what it comes down to. Alright, so now that you've seen how I did that, I'm going to go ahead and do these last two right here, and then we'll go ahead to the last part to this little drop target assembly. Alright, so we'll be right back. Alright, as you can see, I got them all set in place now. So, our next real step is to get this plate put back on. This is kind of like the guide plate for the drop targets. It only goes on really one way, so we'll go ahead and get this put into place, adjust everything out. Just gotta line the hole ups, all three at the same time. Alright. There's a little bit of tension there. Now, the top two screws for this coil, which is the bottom, remember how I told you that there's a couple that are loose, they just set in there? This is where they come in, right here. So you just gotta kind of get them to push out. The reason why they don't just push out is because there's that little spring washer on the other side of the coil that helps hold everything together, puts a little bit of tension on everything. That's part of what holds this whole thing in place. Now you get to screw it to the actual plate. So we'll get that taken care of. Alright, so we went and got this finished up with the rest of these drop targets. I even added the spring on the side. That's supposed to go for the return of the coil here. But basically, everything's working fine. All the springs are completely attached from the drop target to the farthest hole on that little mounting plate. And I've already tested. As you can see, they're dropping down as it is. They drop down great when it comes to just the ball hitting them. And then when the coil resets them, they're set just fine. And the coil arm, the reset arm here, well, it resets to the bottom perfectly fine, nice and loose because of that spring. I didn't have to change any of the springs, it just needed a deep cleaning, so that's excellent. Now we're going to go ahead and set up the missile coil pack. That's pretty easy. Essentially it's just 4 screws, one of which is that screw right there on the bottom part of the coil. Well, I guess you can say the top part of the coil. Oh, and that hole right there. Yep, that one. And then there's 2 holes over here, which is this hole here. That one, right there. And then that upper left one. These go in at an angle, as you can see where the holes line up. And I'll show you exactly why in a little bit. So essentially, we just need to line these up after we take out this bottom screw for the coil. Otherwise it won't line up right. That's a good screw to use to start the lining up. So, get that angled in there. It's going to be a tight fit, so you gotta wedge it around a bit and whatnot. Alright, got that one lined up finally. It can be kind of a pain in the butt. You just gotta be a little patient, wiggle things around until you get it lined up. So now I got that lined up, I'm going to get the last 3 screws put in on both sides, and I'll show you how these are supposed to work. Alright, so we'll be right back here. Alright, as you can see, I got all the screws put in, and this whole assembly is done actually. There's nothing left to do other than to put it back in the game and wire everything back up, and we'll do that in a little bit. But I just want to kind of show you what these coils are supposed to be doing. So we already shown that the reset coil works just fine, and it also goes back down to the bottom like it's supposed to. We already know that the drop targets are working good. So these activate during a missile shot. If you notice on the body, there's 4 buttons, 2 on each side. The upper buttons are for your flipper, and the lower buttons are to shoot missiles. Button on the left side shoots missiles towards the drop targets on the left, and the one on the right shoots towards the one drop target on the right. When you shoot that missile, the coils will activate in order. So when it knows that all these drop targets are up, for example, this missile will shoot and knock the target down. And same with the next one and the next one. And of course, if this target's already down, the switch that's activated on the other side is going to tell the game to know that. So when you shoot a missile, it'll shoot this coil off, not that coil. And so on and so forth. So that's how that whole assembly even works. now we're going to go ahead and put it back in the game and wire it up. And then we're going to pull out the other assemblies and tear them apart just like you did with this and clean it all the way through. We might not wire this right away. We might wire all of them together. And if we do that, you'll see that in another video then. But, alright, let's move on to the next spot. We made sure this works, so we're good to go. Alrighty, so now we're going to go ahead and get this drop target bank put back into place. This is obviously where it goes. Here are the 4 holes that it mounts down to. This direction is the back of the playfield, so you want to make sure that your tank's targets are pointing up. Other way to know is the reset coil is supposed to be down towards the bottom here. So just carefully get this lined up inside here. I always keep the drop targets up when I do it just to make sure it's going in smoothly. It'll probably need a little bit of adjustment in a bit here anyway, but it's somewhere to start with at least. And we just gotta get a screw started in any old hole, don't matter. Just to kind of give us a little bit of helping hand. There we go. Gotta try and hold it right. Okay, I got it all tightened down. Sorry about that, it was just becoming too much of a hassle to do on a camera, so I just got it done quick. I don't have it all wired up. I'm not going to wire it up until later when I get the other ones taken apart and redone. But there's our reset. Resets the drop targets. There's all of our switches for every time a drop target comes down. And then over here, let me get some better light for you. Move this. Aim it there. Okay. And right here, those are the rocket coils. This little bundle of wires here is what wires up to these. These 3 wires, are what go to the reset coil. Then you got a bundle of wires right here that go to each switch. Now there was some I forgot to mention to you yesterday when I was putting this thing back together, and that's actually this plate right here. The reason why I marked it is just so I didn't have to really do too much adjustments, but this is pretty much the adjustments for your drop target height. So like how far the drop target will go below the playfield. So if you have an issue where the drop target is sinking too deep down and the ball's getting stuck there, you can adjust this plate to kind of bring it up a little more flush with the playfield. Or if it's sticking up too high, you can do it in reverse and bring it down. So pretty cool little design. Well, that's going to be it for the video. That's how you put one of these things back together. And again, you'll see me wire this up on a different video when we tear this drop target assembly apart and this one. So that's going to be on the next video. And hope you guys have a wonderful time. We'll see you on the next one.